The bee, the sword, and the lollipop. Difficult. One day last summer, my friends and I were hiking in the Beskida Mountains. We had started our trip in Ustron, and after a few hours of walking, we reached a mountain shelter in Wisła. I remember that the weather was especially nice that day, and there were many people around the shelter. Most of them looked tired and sweaty. The lucky ones sat on benches with tables, while the others sat on large rocks, fallen trees, and blankets. There was a friendly atmosphere in the air, as people ate their sandwiches, checked their maps, and talked about their plans. As I ate my sandwich and drank my water, I looked around and observed the people around me. I wondered, where were they from, and where were they planning to go? That's when, in the corner of my eye, I saw something that caught my attention. It was a young boy, about 6 years old, standing in some high grass. In his right hand, he was holding a long wooden sword. I also noticed that the boy had a lollipop, because there was a thin white stick coming from his mouth, and one of his cheeks was very round, just like a balloon. The boy walked slowly through the tall grass, spinning his body around, while swinging his sword left and right. From time to time, he stopped, and aggressively focused his energy on the grass. I think he wanted to cut the grass with his fast moves, but his toy sword was too dull. Instead of cutting the grass with his swift swings, he simply pushed the grass with the weight of the sword's blade, and soon after the grass bounced back, returning to its original position. The lion-hearted boy was alone, away from his family, but he appeared not to mind. He had a crooked smile on his face as he tightly held his lollipop with his lips. He seemed to be lost in his imagination and totally unaware of the world and people around him. All he cared about was his magical sword and the monstrous grass around him, which was his greatest enemy at that specific moment. As I took another bite of my sandwich, I felt a bit jealous of the boy, but proud of him at the same time. It was wonderful that a cheap sword and a piece of candy could bring him so much joy. But after a moment, my jealousy left, and I felt myself experiencing some of his joy. Although I was sitting on a rock, and I only had a water bottle in my hand, I began experiencing the boy's joy just by watching him play. It reminded me of my own childhood, and how my imagination also took me away to another world. A little later, I saw the same boy, but now he was standing a bit closer to me. He still had his lollipop and sword, but now he was battling a bee. The fast-flying bee flew around and over him. It seemed that the boy wasn't sure where the bee was most of the time, and so he just wildly swung his sword around. The curious bee flew so close to his body that the boy was hitting the bee with his wrist more often than with his mighty sword. His movements became more and more frantic as he started to panic. Unlike the grass, he had no control of the fearless bee, and it looked like he was losing this fight. For the first time that afternoon, I saw fear in the boy's eyes. But the boy didn't run to his parents, or begin to scream and cry. Instead, he continued swinging, with his sword and his lollipop.